Meet Patrick Vernon, a man who wears many hats. He's a British cultural historian, a political activist, and a filmmaker. In 2012, Vernon was awarded the prestigious title OBE, or Officer of the Order of the British Empire, for his work in tackling health inequalities affecting Britain's ethnic minorities. More recently, he has been a leading campaigner on behalf of a group known as the Windrush Generation, migrants from British Commonwealth nations in the West Indies who arrived in Britain between 1948 and 1971. In 2017, it emerged that many of those people, despite having arrived in the UK legally, were being detained and deported as part of a government crackdown. Victims were denied their legal rights and in many cases lost their jobs, their homes, and the lives that they had built over decades. In an anti-immigration climate, Black British people were being coerced to leave. It became known as the Windrush Scandal. Patrick Vernon, who is himself of Jamaican heritage, has been a leading figure in efforts to repair the damage caused by the scandal, campaigning for compensation and for meaningful recognition from the government. On this episode of The InnerView, we speak to Patrick Vernon OBE about the Windrush Scandal and how the UK government has been making up for letting down a generation. Patrick Vernon, OBE, joins us now on The InnerView. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. I want to step back for a second and tell the story from the very beginning. Perhaps let's go to the late 1940s. World War II is over. The United Kingdom needs a workforce after the devastation of World War II. It turns to its colonies, its former colonies in the Caribbean. Explain that context to me and explain what it meant to the people from the West Indies.
Sure. There has always been a long connection with Britain and the West Indies, mainly because of the history of the transatlantic slave trade, where millions of Africans were taken away from Africa as part of that trade, and many, including my ancestors, were based in the Caribbean. After slavery ended, there was a lot of people coming to Britain to work, to study, particularly during the First World War. So after the Second World, when the Second World War was over, Britain needed labour. So through legislation, the 1948 British Nationality Act, that gave anyone where there was a British flag in the colonies, or the Empire as then called, from the Caribbean or parts of Africa or even parts of India, could come to Britain as citizens to work as well. So during that period, there was a whole range of people that came from the Caribbean. Prior to 1948, people were coming before, and also 15,000 had served during the Second World War from the West Indies as well.
Right. And so they believe that this is a land of opportunity. It's sort of seen as the motherland. They get on the HMT Empire Windrush, the ship, that's where the name comes from. They get on it. At any point in time, was it ever in doubt that they would be citizens when they landed in the UK?
Well, as far as people were concerned that were coming from the Caribbean, they saw Britain as the mother country. So when mother called, people felt the need to come here to contribute, obviously raise money, support their families back in the Caribbean. And the 1948 Nationality Act was the actual legitimacy that they could do so. People used the expression invitation. It wasn't quite an invitation because even when that ship, the Empire Windrush ship, and obviously a lot of people came on other ships, and vast majority of that generation came on planes, but that particular ship's quite unique for a whole variety of historical reasons. And even when the ship was coming to Britain from the Caribbean, there was lots of opposition of MPs in Parliament. They didn't want the ship to dock. So there was still a hostility, even though people had the legal right to come and be here.
In the 1970s, things seemed to change somewhat. So to a great extent, the cities
So,
are rebuilt.
basically
Tell me about
was
what happened in the
between
70s.
the first legislation in 1948, there has been successive legislation trying to restrict the number of people coming in from the Caribbean, but also other parts of the Commonwealth, basically. The high point of this was when Enoch Powell, who was a Conservative MP, made a speech in 1968 called Rivers of Blood. He gave this sort of vision of Britain that more and more people were coming from the Caribbean, from India and other parts of the world, that Britain will be overtaken by ethnic minorities and there will be a bloodbath of the streets of Britain. This fear, actually, in many ways, which is still quite relevant today in terms of immigration policy, has influenced how a lot of laws have changed to make it difficult to restrict the rights of those people who were initially invited to either make them almost like second-class citizens. So by the time you reach the early 70s, there was new legislation which stopped and restricted the number of people coming in from the Caribbean and other parts of the Commonwealth. And that is almost like a watershed when the Windrush generation that were coming to Britain was halted.
So Patrick, thanks for that context about the 50s, the 40s, 50s, into the 70s. So let's fast forward now. Sort of circa 2010 to 2012, the Tory government, Theresa May is the Home Secretary. They have this, what they call hostile policy or hostile environment policy towards what they say ostensibly is illegal immigration. People think Asia, maybe parts of Africa, maybe the Middle East. While that was going on, help me understand your mindset. At that point, did you think at any point that this might affect the Windrush generation and their descendants?
So between the period of 2010 to 2018, there has always been people being deported back to the Caribbean and to other parts of the world. Often it wasn't the case where people may have overstayed, they might have got a visa, and then they didn't go back or leave at the necessary time, to be quite honest, because there was more and more legislation that was introduced by the government, actually, not just the Conservative government, but all governments since the 70s, to be quite honest. Each time there's a new government, there's always new legislation around immigration. It was also during that time where there was a big campaign around Brexit, so for Britain to leave Europe, and that further was intensified in that period, and that led to the creation of the hostile environment policy by Theresa May, which the policy was designed to either force people to leave or say to people, you're not welcome here. And some people did leave or voluntarily as a result of that. But it didn't really transpire that the Windrush generation were directly affected by this until about 2016, 17, there were various cases reported in the media where people who had come to Britain as children, as part of that generation, who were in their 50s, 60s and 70s, and were now getting letters threatening with deportation back to the countries where they were when they were first born. But they saw themselves as British or saw themselves as citizens. So there were quite a few of these cases that were particularly reported in the Guardian newspaper. And between 2017 to about 2018, there must have been at least 20, 30 of these cases of people who had lost their jobs or were sacked or lost their housing or couldn't access their pensions because they were deemed to be illegal immigrants. So at the time, it wasn't called the scandal or Windrush Scandal. It was just simply, most people thought it was just the implementation of immigration policy, which was no different to any other person from other countries who were deemed not to be British. However, as more of these cases transpired, there was a pattern. The pattern number one, most of them came to Britain as children or young adults between the 50s, 60s and 70s. Number two of them, even though the scandal itself affected Caribbean people, it did affect also people from Africa and also did affect people from, even Canadians were affected by that, but the vast majority of people were affected were from the Caribbean, and in particular from Jamaica, who had already got its independence as a country in 1962. And the third thing, most of them either had passports which had expired when they first came here, or they never applied for a passport. It's estimated in Britain that maybe 30% of the UK population do not have a passport, so that's quite common. So they didn't have passports. They came here as children and young adults, and they had more or less permanently had been residents in Britain for at least 30, 40 years. And these were the key characteristics that became what we now know as the Windrush Scandal, or Home Office Windrush Scandal, because they all came from that generation as well.
In the UK, they like to say, there's the British saying, asking whether it's a cock-up or a conspiracy. From all the government's apologies, they try to express the idea that it was just a series of mistakes. But when we look at the fact that even the landing cards were destroyed, the actual physical, tangible proof of these people landing in the UK, that was actively destroyed in around 2010. Was it clear policy, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of cock-up and part conspiracy. As you remember, there was a lot of pressure on the government to try and reduce net migration, which is still a big issue even today. And the policy, or hostile environment policy, was designed to try and reduce net migration. But what it did, actually, it targeted the Windrush generation, who were seen as easy targets or low-hanging fruit to meet those targets. And what we found out afterwards, that the government were paying bonuses to Home Office officials and to companies to try and reduce the net migration figures. So the Windrush generation was seen as an easy target to target, and that's what happened, basically, because even though the government said you had to prove to be British, they already had enough information about the Windrush generation they were paying taxes, registered to vote, etc. So that's what happened, and I did a petition in March 2018 to highlight that the Windrush generation were being targeted by the government, and secondly, they had to be given their full rights back again as citizens, and to be compensated for loss and hurt they had endured as well. So along with pressure from CARICOM, which is the 15 English-speaking Caribbean countries, the diplomats who were based in London were also lobbying the government. And when they had the Commonwealth Summit in London, a number of Caribbean governments were raising their concerns also with the British government. So all these came to put pressure eventually on the government and for Theresa May to apologise.
As I was doing my research, looking into this, it's hard to come across a definitive number of the people affected by this. How big was it? Do you know?
Well, it was estimated by a government department, the National Audit Office, that potentially 50,000 people or even more may be affected by this scandal. Through the introduction of what is known as the Windrush Task Force, which was set up by the government in 2018 to help regularise people's status, over 10,000 people have had their status resolved, which is a positive thing, but there's still thousands of people still who have not come forward for two main reasons: because they don't trust the Home Office. They feel that if they contact the Home Office, they feel they may be deported, or they might not get the right type of support as well. So that's still a big factor surrounding this.
Right. There has been compensation. Has it been enough?
The money's never enough, to be quite honest. How can you compensate where someone has not worked for over 10 years, lost their home, had an impact on their emotional and physical health? So money's not enough. The money that's been awarded so far over the last several years, even though some people have received reasonable compensation. The vast majority of people who receive compensation has not met the money that they need to move on with their lives. And actually, there have been quite a few cases, over 2,000 cases, where their applications have been rejected outright. Yeah. So that's why the compensation scheme has failed. It's not really addressed the financial, emotional needs that people have endured. And also, it's taken far too long for it to be administered properly by the government. And a lot of people have died while waiting for the money.
Right. Back in June, you had Windrush Day. You were at the center of establishing Windrush Day, 22nd of June. Yes. So it's been, what, seven years since the first one. Tell me what that means to you.
Well, Windrush Day was established by Sam King, who was a passenger on the Empire Windrush ship. He served in the Second World War, and he helped set up a charity called the Windrush Foundation. So he started the idea of a Windrush Day back in the 1980s, organising local events in South London, and then eventually that helped to raise the profile of the Windrush Generation. And in many ways, I think he coined the phrase Windrush Generation. I got involved in around about 2010. I made a documentary about one particular gentleman called Eddie Martin Noble, who had served in the Second World War. So I was involved in making this film. Then I worked with a whole range of NGOs and politicians to start to have a national day, to make it national. Actually, personally, I wanted it to be a public holiday, but that would have been difficult. So we went. So for about 10 years, we were campaigning for a national Windrush Day, and then when the Windrush Scandal broke, and when the government were apologising to the Windrush Generation, the government then adopted Windrush Day. So Windrush Day has been going in terms of government support for the last 7 years, but the concept of Windrush Day has been going for much longer, and it was first established within the Windrush Generation community.
How much more still needs to be done for Britain to sort of reckon with the past and the treatment of the Windrush Generation?
Well, the first thing is to make sure that the compensation scheme is run effectively, independently. There's been calls for it to be run outside the government, outside the Home Office, because the Home Office were the perpetrators in the first place. Secondly, when Theresa May apologised, she instituted an independent report on the causes of the scandal, so we could learn the lessons. It's called the Lessons Learnt Review. That report came out in 2020. Then a year later, the government didn't implement all the recommendations, so much so that an organisation called Black Equity Organisation and Unison, one of the largest trade unions in Britain, took legal action against the government. They did the judicial review in the High Court, which they won, which forcing the government to take seriously to implement all the recommendations. Now with a new government, with Labour came into power over a year ago, they've made a commitment that they will implement the recommendations. They've just recently appointed Clive Foster, Reverend Clive Foster, as the Windrush Commissioner, who will oversee those recommendations. So we'll have to see and wait and see if the government are serious about righting the wrongs, whether the compensation scheme could be moved forward quicker. But also it's about recognising the history and legacy of this generation. This weekend gone, we had the Notting Hill Carnival, which was set up by the Windrush Generation in the 1960s. And every year the carnival is always under threat in terms of lack of support and funding. If the government is serious about the history of Windrush, they should properly fund the carnival. The carnival is the second biggest carnival in the world outside Rio. Over 2 million people attend the carnival. Over £400 million or 500 million euros is generated in terms of economic benefit for the carnival, but yet there's lack of recognition to fully fund this as well. And then finally, I'm part of a team. We're trying to raise money. We're looking for about 3 to 4 million euros to recover the anchor from the original ship. The Empire Windrush ship is off the coast of Algeria. It's been there since 1955 after engine failure. So we want to raise money to get the anchor, to bring it back to Britain, to celebrate the history of migration, to celebrate the history of belonging, and to remind people that Britain, like other parts of Europe, migration has been good for the country, and this is really, really important in terms of the social, economic, cultural benefits of migration, and particularly the contribution of the Windrush generation.
Is it any surprise to you that even under Labour, even under this Keir Starmer government, there's this pressure to do something about migration and to stem the tide, which often then brings in and includes elements such as, well, you're not as English as I am, or you're not as British as I am, being, for example, somebody saying, I don't know, I'm white, native, and so on and so forth. These questions in the year 2025, even under a Labour government, still rear their head, still have oxygen, and there's still people making a noise about them. Tell me how you feel about that.
This is nothing new. I was born in Britain. My parents came to Britain in the 1950s as part of that generation. They faced hostility. They saw signs saying no blacks, no dogs, no Irish in the streets, and that discrimination is still there, hasn't changed that much. So the country has to come to terms. They want the benefits of migration. They want the music, they want the fashion, they want the entrepreneurship, they want the money and the talent. That is part of Britain, so you can't have your cake and eat it. I think, that's why the political parties are still campaigning to say, let's make Britain white. But Britain, if you look at the history of Britain, Britain has always had migration. I just wish people would smell the coffee and move on with their lives.
Give me a bit of a forecast for the future. 10 years from now, what do you hope to see happening?
That's a good question, actually. 10 years now, I hope that Britain is at ease with itself when it comes to the issue of race and migration. Secondly, that we still need to tackle structural discrimination in Britain, so we give everyone the fair opportunities around access to jobs, employment and housing. And then thirdly, I think more importantly, we have new generations of young people of different migrant communities. It's important for them that they feel British. It's important for them to feel valued, because they are going to be the future leaders. They could be running the country. They could be running business. They could be running the health service, doctors, nurses, teachers, engineers. And it's really important that we nurture the future migration of young people, whether they came to Britain last week, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It's really important that we nurture that talent.
Right. Patrick Vernon, OBE, it's been a pleasure talking to you on the interview. Thanks so much for demystifying the context, the history, the background of the Windrush scandal. It's been a pleasure. Thanks again.
No problem at all.
Take care.